I don't know that I ever got the full story of how you landed at Hallows. So why don't we start with that?
Okay.
And then what kept you here, and what your experiences have been with the mission and the values, and how you label them. What are they, Vincentian? Are they just important values, or what?
Okay.
So start with how you came here. You were probably born here or something.
No, I was a secondary school teacher of mathematics.
I remember that.
And I have a twin sister. This is not very well known, but at one stage I overheard a Department of Education inspector on the corridor, and he was saying to the principal, "I come out, I want to see one of the McPhillips mathematicians." And so we came into the class and all was well, and I remember going home that evening and saying to myself, do I really want to be known as a McPhillips mathematician? Is that what I want to see on my gravestone? Is that really what I want to see on my gravestone? And so that thought kind of triggered a lot of other stuff. I was teaching in a relatively poor area, and the infrastructure with parents wasn't great. And sometimes when I'd be having a parent-teacher meeting to talk to them about their sons or daughters' maths, I'd be going into the parent-teacher meeting saying, I need to say to them, this child needs 8 hours sleep, and not feeling that really I had the skills or the pastoral skills to do that kind of thing. Or you'd have a mother come into you, and the mother would be falling asleep as she was at the parent-teacher meeting. You'd say, you're very tired, and she'd say, well, my husband drives a truck and he's away, and I'm nervous in the house on my own. And then you'd say, and what about your daughter, because she's sleepy in class too? Well, I keep her up to keep me company. And I remember thinking, I actually don't have the skills to deal with this. I need to do something that would equip me a bit better. So I came and I did a graduate diploma in leadership here. And it was a search, is how I put it, a search going on for really how I wanted to live my life, and not sure that how I was doing it, even though I loved it, was the way I wanted to do it forever. So I came here and I did the graduate diploma, and there was about 48 people in the class, and there was about 4 lay people. And I remember feeling, I suppose, a connection, or feeling somehow how they articulated things made sense, and I felt I belonged at some, and I was getting a quality of conversation that I wasn't getting in other places. So I don't know if that makes sense. And I suppose then, at the end of that year, I decided I won't go back into school. I wouldn't mind being involved in adult faith education or young people faith education. So I worked for a year with Limerick Diocese on young adult faith development. And in the course of that year, Father Galvin, who was a Vincentian here, would ring me constantly. I worked for the summer. At the end of the course, I worked for the summer. They were opening the conference centre, and I stayed and worked for the summer. And during the year, he used to ring me and say, would you think of coming back and being part of staff? And it was to help him run the conference centre. And I said, I don't really know if that's where I see myself either. And he said, if you come back, if there's any openings in terms of faith development or where you want to be, if you spot anything that's going on in All Hallows that you want to be part of, we'll do our best to accommodate you. So I came then on staff.
Okay.
And then over the years I did a bit of training on, did a bit on systems thinking, did a bit on supervision. So I used to be involved on the programmes in terms of pastoral supervision with the students. So I had a role that involved running the conference centre and being involved in some programmes. You asked about what did I see as Vincentian. I actually think it was Carol Ann that one time said about, the sticky stuff or the glue that keeps this place together. And there's something about that I associate with being Vincentian. And the stuff that I can't capture, but there was the sense of welcome, the sense of being about the world, making the world a better place, And for me, whether it was the seminary or whether it was a third level education, I always saw that All Hallows was about people for people. And what was the need that people had, and how did we educate people to fulfil that need? So whether it was seminary or whether it was the third level, it was about an eye to see what people needed in terms of their formation.
Yeah. It's interesting, what I came from at DePaul was, for its size and its complexity and all, the incredible awareness of the mission and purpose of DePaul, or the DePaul education. And it was so similar when I came here, and size-wise it was incredibly different. But that same sense that staff, and it just permeated DePaul, and it permeated here. And when I was talking to Des this morning, how we talked about how even though people's jobs are vastly different and maybe different levels of connection with students or administration or whatever, but that sense that everybody was kind of an equal and kind of marching with the same tune and all, and how valuable it was in keeping people here because of the purpose and the impact. And I think the real impact is not just on your own lives, but on the lives of those students that are going through it here. So it resonates with what you're saying.
I think that Kevin Rafferty did some stuff that really enabled that. I mean, opening the dining room that everybody ate together.
That's what Des talked about.
Yeah. Calling people by their first names. Yeah. I mean, that you wouldn't have seen that in other colleges. And they're simple, but they actually embody the values. And I suppose the one thing I would be really grateful to Pat McDevitt is around making that Vincentians piece explicit. I feel we caught it and passed it on, and I would claim to be Vincentian. But I think when Pat came, he made it explicit. That piece of work around the mission and making that explicit. I saw conversations that happened internally I was on the operations side of the house, among all levels of the operation, and the people could really buy into that. It made sense of what they were doing, but it also made it explicit.
Was it not labeled before that? Was this a labeling and further clarification as to how it drove the place and impacted people?
Yes, I think because we changed from a seminary to a third level, there were several different branches. There were the accredited programs and there were the non-accredited programs. And so we were for an awful lot of things, but we weren't claiming explicitly what we were for and what we weren't. And I think we needed the development that happened under Mark, but we also needed the clarity at that point to say, what does this all come under? What are we about? I think it was very helpful.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I was talking to Basil and Christy, particularly Basil, who goes back so many years, and he talked about the John Hand influence, and it wasn't necessarily Vincentian, even though it was about the John Hand influence, and then as it moved forward, and I don't think it was, as I'm sensing it wasn't really until maybe Rafferty that it started to get labeled as kind of the St. Vincent de Paul values, or Vincentian values. And then I was impressed when I saw the strategic plan that came into play well before the year before I came, that it was much more explicit and named in the mission clearly, and then expected outcomes and things like that. Yeah,
I think.
But it was what I found interesting though was it was the same thing that was keeping people here, keeping people motivated, and what really drove the culture of the place, even though it wasn't named until a little bit later. Yeah. Huh. What in your work in operations, and I think the huge influence that you've had not only on the college and some of the business decisions, but more importantly, I think through your work in HR was development of staff, hiring of staff. How did the mission or whatever it was that was important to you play out in who you hired and how you expected staff to function here and operate here, contribute to the climate and culture?
I suppose one of the biggest things I would say in terms of recruitment was around a right fit, and it's hard to describe how the right fit was, but right fit was around values. My take is really that if people are intelligent and buy into the mission of what you're doing, even if they don't have the skills, they can learn the skills. So, and that's what I describe as a right fit. And I mean, you do out your criteria and your competencies that you need, but the quality of how people engage with those questions gives you another layer of information, which is actually the critical piece in terms of how they will be here. One of the things that always touched me was when you'd actually go into a staff meeting and you would be, there'd be a whole lot of things going on the agenda, but you'd look down and you'd see the people who formed the All Hallows employees, and I mean, every time I looked down I would be kind of overwhelmed by the qualities and the capacity that was in the room. I mean, and that has been evidenced, I have to say, in the wind down, because you do see the cut and thrust of people when you're in a crisis. It's easy to be around for the glory days, but when you're in a crisis and when people's back are against the wall, I mean, you can see as we did those processes, the conversations that we had with people, you can see the calibre of the staff that we had. So the question was, how
no,
did
it's just I think one is the hiring process, and you talked about that, what you look for and what you kind of discerned, what values you discerned a potential employee or candidate for a position. And then the next part of it was, how did you continue to form those people or orient them, get them to further embrace, I think the mission. And sometimes it just becomes addictive for people. And that was something I experienced, but I think it's what I saw so many people here, which I think gets to this last point of, when you get into this crisis and it's potentially affecting people's jobs and their livelihood and things like that, and you still see people rising to the level that you've talked about, that you've had in the last couple of years, that's pretty remarkable. I don't think you find that in too many businesses that are winding down or nonprofits that are winding down. People start bailing out, and maybe there's not been the opportunities to bail out, but that's not my sense of how people, and to keep the staff that you did, faculty and staff, to sustain a good educational experience for the students and teaching them out. It's a pretty remarkable story, and that gets to a lot of the folks that are in the room and have been in the room here at a sad and kind of an experience of really kind of a slow death, really. And yet there's that mourning, and yet there's that stepping up and making things happen. So I think that gets to the culture that people have created here. And
I think too, Jim, there was a tradition of, kind of before I was involved in hiring, of recruiting people who may have been formed or had some link, and I think implicitly that probably was trying to attend to the value and the cultures. It was never explicitly named, but that was kind of part of how recruitment happened. I think we were more explicit about what we were looking for in latter times. But going back to the when I said earlier about not sure about where I wanted to kind of live life, or that I have to say and I never thought I'd say this, I mean, if you put a line of people up, of 20 people up to be involved in a wind down, you would not pick me, because I'm not actually a good finisher. But I also have had the sense, in terms of faith or whatever we call it, that this is the right place for me to be. I mean, and that is a blessing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is also a privilege to, you know, to see the resilience in people, our students and our staff, and their a capacity to give care and attention when there's a whole other agenda going on for them, that there has to be around survival for their families. So, I mean, if that wouldn't make you believe, if you didn't believe, and humble you to your bootstraps, I don't know what would.
Yeah.
So it's a complete privilege.
Well, and I would see that it is a privilege, but I think maybe with your background and skill set, your ministerial and pastoral kind of experience or orientation, that probably made you better suited to managing a wind down than a more corporate mindset would have handled things here very differently, and probably not to the benefit of the staff and students as they have. But
I would have to say, in terms of that, when the announcement was coming up to the announcement of the wind down, we went in to visit a corporate company, say, who do this kind of thing, and we met this lady who was a lovely lady to talk about how wind downs were done. But I can still remember her. I mean, she was dead behind the eyes. That's the only way I can describe it. She was a lovely lady, and I would work easily with her. But they didn't work with people. They came in and delivered the wind down. It was they just come in and did like that. And, you know, the movie. There's a movie. God, I can't remember the name of it. Where it was the job to go in and announce wind downs. Well, this lady did that job, and I remember saying, "Oh God, I couldn't I couldn't hand it over," and yet she was lovely to work with, but it had deadened her soul. I'm saying, no, we couldn't have that. So we have been very blessed.
Yeah. Tell me, what are some of your stories, I guess, or what you think are some of the significant periods that you've had to help manage or work through besides this wind down, going back to some of the early days that you were here? What were some of the major events that you were involved in, and how you managed through those?
Well, there were things like the refurbishment of Purcell House, which was significant, and I suppose the most significant part of that wasn't actually, well, there was two pieces. One was managing the religious community who lived here and sorting them out for other accommodation on campus and navigating that.
That was tough.
Yeah, because people viewed accommodation and you had limited accommodation to offer, and people could make judgments about what you were offering to different people. Yeah. So that was one piece. I suppose the other piece at that was around kind of the architects, and we had a change in architect through that process, and the second one we got probably wasn't as aligned with the values. So that meant kind of staying on the job and watching everything in terms of detail and standards. So, I mean, the job turned out very well, but there was a lot done in the background to kind of make it happen. So I would be proud of that. To be honest with you, some of the things that I would be proud of would be students who I would have seen come in and be very hesitant about themselves, their experience and their skill set, and seeing them over the course of their education and being involved in process work here, really move to a different place, to claim their own leadership to have confidence in their own skill set, to be convicted about their place in the world, and have been a part of that. Sometimes to have hung in with them, sometimes to give them a little kick up the backside to get the thing in. But to watch that journey and to have any part in it, it was fascinating, and it was also, it was like a bit like giving birth. You couldn't but say, God, that was a great day's work. And there was a lot of them, and there was a lot of people, both religious and lay, but I'm also thinking particularly of religious, who went out and served and came back broken, and needed space to, regroup and renew the belief in themselves, maybe, and the church, and that happened in this space.
Wow.
So I would be very proud to have been part of that.
The only group of nuns that I had much experience with were the few African sisters that were here, and their desire for education, and then the diocese not having their own diocese or order not having the money to sustain them, and then having to give it up. I always thought that was, and we weren't in a position to offer financial. I thought that was sad. I felt very, very bad about that. Yeah. The other one are the Alba students, and particularly the stories I heard from the Aer Lingus employees, and some even saying how much it was their lifeline that they wouldn't have. I guess the suicide rate during that period was very high, and for some to say that they this was their survival tactic, it's pretty powerful. And then Alba in particular, and I think a lot of the undergraduates, first generation educated, to be able to say that their experience here really.
And I think particularly the Aer Lingus group, I think they were one of the groups that nearly, there was both an implicit and explicit uniting of staff. I remember the day they came in, I can remember the faces, and I can remember the atmosphere among them, how heavy. And there was nearly like a collective. I can remember Mary Hayes in the office saying, we have to support these men, there has to be a better future for them. So like Desi, everybody would have said, whatever they need, where are you going, where do you need to go, I'll bring you. There was a level of kind of commitment across the organisation because you wanted it to be better for them.
Sure. Yeah.
And that adult learning BA was really a gift at that particular time.
It's remarkable, the impact, and the stories that you do hear.
The other thing that I would be proud of, Jim, which is not really about education at all, it's about problem solving. I think that a number of times we hit small little crises along the way, like we had the Brothers and Sisters in Christ for the ordination of women, that group, and at one stage in our
did the Archbishop talk to them? Was there
Well, the Archbishop didn't talk to that. And the group came in and said they were going to have a Mass, and a woman was going to preside at the Mass, and that she was going to have Eucharist, and it hit the radio station.
Oh, did
it? And Mark Noonan was in as president at the time.
Well, that goes way back. Wow.
So it was banana skins all around the place. And I could, at that stage, say, okay, here's what we're going to do. So we gathered a team, we got a couple of people on switchboards, we negotiated with the group, etc. So there have been a couple of times those kind of things have happened. Now I have to say I get buzz out of that. I get a buzz out of this is a problem and saying, well, we can either drink enough wine, get enough people in the room, and we will come up with a solution that we can all live with and that it will work out okay. Yeah. So there's a few examples of that through my time here that will always be special.
Well, that incident in particular, without getting lambasted by the Chancery office as well. But I think that raises the next question I would have for you, because I've always admired your leadership style and your approach to problem solving, just like you said, your way of gathering people together to deal with issues and create some conversation and get the best thinking out of it and move forward. So two questions. First is how would you talk about your leadership style? I know you don't like talking about yourself, but tell me a little bit how you would describe it, reference it, and what got you to this point to be what I consider a successful leader, not just crisis manager, but I think an influential leader in your community.
Well, I suppose if I was using any model at all, Jim, it would be, I do think the servant leader one is probably the one that resonates most. My experience has been that, well, that if you lead by example, if you do your best, if you're willing to do anything you'd ask anybody else to do, that certainly people who are like-minded will join you. I do take great pleasure in seeing other people take a lead. That's my experience. I mean, it can be a simple thing, but if you listen to the voices, there will be one or a combination that rings through, and that's right and fit, and then it's easy to take the lead.
And I think that is exactly the qualities of a good servant leader, a value-based leader, and I think that's what you have exhibited, and why you've, I think, been very successful in helping to manage this transition. So, I don't mean to turn this into a therapy session, but why we're at it, and that's not the purpose of this oral tradition, but I think it is some record for people to hear and understand what got Hallows through this process, this wind down. And it goes back to when we thought we still had hope of keeping it open.
Yeah.
And, things that I talked to Jim Lillis about, where were we at before the turning point, and how were we operating, and then the reality after the turning point, and how were things managed. And he was very complimentary of the management of all that's happened since the decision was made about the wind down. And a good part of that was very complimentary about you, but it's a lot of other people that have been in this room and elsewhere and stepping up and doing it. I know this next question is a sensitive one. I'm going to ask it anyways because I think it's part of the leadership dilemma of how do you balance home life and family and work life. And, for many people, when you're in this crisis, you live here, which I know you have. But I think you've got a very supportive husband and family. And times I've talked to you on the phone from Chicago, or when you were over, you talked about your kids and what's going on. And so you stayed very connected. So tell me how you balanced all that, or if you haven't balanced it, tell me that too. And if things are not working out at home, then you can find somebody to help you.
It's probably working out, Jim, because I'm not there. How I balance it, the answer is badly. There's no point in telling a lie. I haven't done that well.
Is that your own assessment?
It will be my own assessment. I mean, my two boys are teenage years, and the fact that I'm less there they might find it more beneficial, but I don't think I have done that as well as I would like to. I'm not going to say as well as I could. However, Jerry is very supportive, and he is also a person who I think All Hallows and him have been kind of two anchors in my life, because he would push you to be the best that you could be. Now, he's not a guy that would push much on anyone, but I mean, if I was having a difference with anybody or stressed about anything like that, Jerry's departing line to you as you would leave the house to put them in their place would be, Mary, remember you can always afford to be generous. So he would call out of you the best. And All Hallows does that too. And I think he would be very, not saying he wouldn't get frustrated, but he would be very understanding that you have to do this as well as you want it done, because there's not another chance to do it. And so I have been very blessed, very blessed. I'd say the lads, I'd say at times the fact that I'm missing a wee bit helps.
You don't want to know.
But I have been very blessed with them as well. And they would encourage your they'd encourage your faith as well. They would ask plenty of questions, and they would also challenge me not to to chill, and to put up with a house sometimes that isn't tidy or isn't how it might be with two teenage boys. That's good for me.
Yeah. Don't sweat the
And don't sweat. And I suppose the other thing is that one of the gifts I think we've been blessed with in All Hallows is a wonderful sense of humour. I think there's a great sense of fun among staff. There's a great sense of humour. We can laugh at ourselves and we can tease one another. And they certainly do that for me at home as well.
I think you're absolutely right about that element of good humour and being able to tell stories, enjoy the good things and celebrate those. There's a much more of a glass half full here that I saw, and I think many in the room bring that. It's important, especially all that's been going on. So that spirit of faith too, I think, was remarkable here. You and many others, that the sense of where their faith was, and in spite of all that's going on with the church, I think there was a real spirituality that was critically important.
And I think this place fed that, and I think that's one of the things that I will miss into the future. I doubt, no matter where I work, that we go to a meeting and somebody introduces a quiet minute or two just for reflection, to be there, something that feeds your spirit. And that happens, it happens with the quality of the conversations, it happens with how we conduct ourselves, and I suppose it's woven into the fabric, so you don't even notice and you take it for granted.
And you can't just go someplace or start up a new organization and create that. That's very organic, and it's an evolution. One person, I forget who it was or where it was, made the comment that there's the passmen in their history and tradition that's been protected and preserved. There needs to be a way that students who graduated from here have that same opportunity to reminisce and come back and talk about All Hallows and the way they've experienced it and what's been important. And I think that's part of what you're doing with the corridor there. But how does it reflect them in the corridor or elsewhere that this is their what they have an affinity to that's important?
I think one of the things that did happen over the festival week, which I'm really glad about, there's been such a variety on in the week that on Monday, I think it was in the open day, there were students who came back who were on the early part of the BA, but they heard of it, and some of them travelled from Tipperary, Limerick, Cork to drop in because they wanted the opportunity to reminisce, and they had agreed to meet one another here and go for lunch and have coffee. So, yes, those kind of things, and I suppose it is easier in a way for the past men because they have a structure to do that than there is for the for the newer students.
Alrighty, we good?
Lovely, we're great.
You didn't get the handkerchief. I was expecting